What if I told you that the blueprint for every single modern corporate scandal, every toxic relationship dynamic, and well, basically every societal collapse was written down thousands of years ago,
Right.
and that it revolves entirely around a single question about a tree?
I mean, it sounds like a huge exaggeration when you frame it that way.
Yeah, it really
But
does.
when you actually sit down and dissect the mechanics of that ancient text,
hmm
the parallels are, well, they're undeniably precise.
Right, because you look at human nature today, and there is this profound, almost unresolvable tension.
Yeah, a massive tension.
On one hand, you look at what we are capable of as a species,
Yeah.
like the breathtaking art, the incredible acts of self-sacrifice, medical breakthroughs. I mean, the sheer engineering marvel of a space telescope.
Oh, absolutely. The heights of human achievement are staggering.
Exactly. We are beautifully capable of greatness. But then, literally in the very same news cycle, or often in the very same human heart, you see this terrifying, almost predictable propensity for self-sabotage.
Yeah, the ruin.
Right. We build these magnificent cooperative societies, and then we tear them down with warfare and greed. We find profound love, and then we introduce jealousy or betrayal just to break it.
Which is so baffling.
It is.
Yeah.
Why is it that human nature feels so incredibly exalted, yet so, uniquely prone to ruining everything?
Well, it is the ultimate paradox of the human condition, right?
Yeah.
We are caught between this soaring dignity and this devastating ruin.
Yeah.
And if you look at the broad sweep of history or philosophy or modern psychology, essentially every single discipline is trying to answer that exact question.
Like, why are we like this?
Exactly. Why is the world so glorious and yet so fundamentally broken at the exact same time?
And that, for everyone listening, is the exact paradox we are exploring with you today on this deep dive.
It's a huge topic.
It really is. We are going on a mission to understand the anatomy of human temptation, conflict, and redemption. And to do that, we are looking at what you might call the ultimate architectural blueprint of brokenness.
The biblical account of the fall in Genesis chapter 3.
Right. Our primary source for this deep dive is a rigorously detailed theological essay titled The Temptation of Humanity by Chris R. Velazquez.
It's an incredible piece of writing.
It really is, and it's accompanied by these two incredibly intricate visual infographics that map out the exact mechanics of this narrative.
And it is crucial to establish our footing right at the start here. For you listening, whether you view this text as divine revelation or foundational literature or just a profound mythological framework, the psychological and sociological mechanisms it describes hold up under intense scrutiny.
Yeah, they really do.
Velazquez's essay argues that Genesis 3 isn't presenting a small, private, moral failure or, just a tiny deviation from a set of rules.
Right, it's way bigger than that.
It is documenting a catastrophic rupture in the moral architecture of reality itself. The argument here is that this ancient text actually explains the source code of every spiritual, relational, and social fracture that we experience today.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because if you want to understand a ruined building, you can't just stare at the rubble and complain about the mess, right?
You have to look at the structure.
Exactly. You have to go back to the original architectural blueprints to see where the load-bearing walls were actually supposed to be before the fracture happened.
Right, before the collapse.
So Velazquez takes us back before the fall to Genesis 1 and 2. What was the original design for humanity in this framework? Because, the popular cultural image is just two naked people sitting around a pristine garden playing a harp or something, doing absolutely nothing.
Yeah, and that popular image is entirely detached from the actual text. It's a complete misreading.
Right.
The original design, as outlined in Genesis 1.26 through 28, is what Velazquez describes as, and this is a key phrase, a priestly kingly vocation.
Okay, that's a heavy phrase. Priestly kingly.
It is heavy, but it's vital. The text states humanity is created in the image of God. Now, in the ancient Near Eastern context, an image or a statue of a king was placed in a conquered territory to represent his sovereign rule.
Oh, wow. So it wasn't just a physical resemblance.
Not at all. So the text is saying humans were not created as autonomous, accidental matter that just happened to develop sentience. They were living, breathing statues of the Creator.
I love that imagery.
Right. And they were explicitly commissioned to rule, to steward, to work, and to keep the garden.
A priestly kingly vocation. That shifts the entire paradigm for me. It gives so much dignity and weight to the human purpose,
It completely changes the tone.
It's not just, hey, exist here and don't make a mess. The mandate is, you are my representatives. You are actively participating in the flourishing of creation.
Yeah, you are meant to take the raw materials of this garden and cultivate them.
Precisely. To be human in this original state was to live under a specific order, operating as a conduit between the divine and the material world.
But here is the critical structural element that sets up the entire conflict. And honestly, it's the thing modern readers struggle with the most.
Oh, boundary.
Yes,
Yeah.
that flourishing was designed to happen within a specific boundary. And that boundary was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil.
Okay, I am so glad you brought that up because I have to push back on this on behalf of every skeptical reader, myself included.
Please do.
We look at that tree and the immediate modern reaction is, why put the one dangerous thing right in the middle of the garden?
Right, it feels like a setup.
Yeah. If I give my toddler a massive playroom full of amazing toys, but I put a loaded handgun on a low table in the center of the room and say, don't touch that, I am not setting a healthy boundary.
No, you'd be a terrible parent.
Exactly. I am a terrible, negligent parent setting a trap. It feels like an arbitrary, cosmic setup for failure.
That is the natural modern reflex. Absolutely. I hear that comparison all the time.
It just seems so unnecessary.
But Velazquez argues that this analogy actually misunderstands the nature of the tree and the nature of the boundary.
How so?
Well, the tree wasn't a loaded gun. It wasn't an arbitrary hazard placed there just to test their willpower or see if they'd mess up. In the logic of the narrative, the tree was a physical manifestation of a structural reality. And that reality is that moral authority belongs to the Creator alone.
Okay, break that down for me. How does a literal tree represent moral authority?
Think about it like the laws of physics. Gravity isn't an arbitrary rule that the universe placed on you to ruin your fun, right?
Right. It's just how things work.
Exactly. It is the structural reality of the environment you live in. If you step off a 10-story building, you aren't so much breaking the law of gravity as you are breaking yourself against it.
Oh, that makes sense.
The essay argues that the command not to eat from that specific tree was the outward, tangible sign that the human creature is not self-legislating.
So they don't get to make the rules.
Right. Humans don't get to independently define what is right and wrong. They receive that definition from their creator.
So the boundary is actually a tether to reality.
Exactly. Velazquez uses the term covenantal freedom. Human freedom in the garden, according to this text, was absolute and real.
They weren't robots.
No, they were not automatons. But it was a freedom designed to flourish within a divine order. To be truly human is to receive life, meaning, and goodness as a gift, rather than seizing it and defining it for yourself.
Right, rather than trying to be the source of it.
Exactly. The tree was the singular place in the garden where humanity had to constantly acknowledge, I am a creature, not the creator.
I see. So it's a tension between derived authority and autonomous authority that completely changes how you view the boundary.
It really does.
It isn't a test to see if they will break a rule. It's a mechanism to keep them grounded in reality. But, and this is big, but if they had this perfect covenantal freedom and everything they could ever want or need was provided, how does a perfectly secure mind even begin to entertain the idea of rebellion?
That's where the essay's breakdown of the serpent's arrival becomes truly fascinating.
And honestly, a bit terrifying.
It really is a masterclass in psychological manipulation. Genesis 3 introduces the serpent as a creature of cunning. And the brilliance of the serpent's strategy, as the infographics detail, is that he doesn't start with a blatant, terrifying display of evil.
He doesn't roll into the garden like a conquering army.
Right. He doesn't declare war on the creator with weapons. He starts with interpretive suspicion. He attacks at the level of epistemology.
Epistemology. The philosophy of how we know what we know. How we determine what is true.
Exactly. He attacks the foundation of knowing. He wants to dismantle the human's mechanism for understanding reality.
So how does he do it?
Well, Velazquez breaks this down into a four-part attack. And when you look closely at the methodology, it mirrors modern disinformation campaigns perfectly.
Yes, let's look at the mechanism of this attack, because it doesn't begin with a command to do evil. Step one is simply a question. The serpent asks the woman, did God actually say?
Look at the sheer subtlety of that mechanism. He destabilizes revelation.
He just pokes a little hole in it.
Right. He takes the clear, firm word that formed their reality and injects a microscopic drop of ambiguity. Did he actually say that? Are you entirely sure you understood the nuance? Maybe you're misremembering.
Oh, that is so manipulative.
He doesn't deny the word yet. He just shifts the human mind from a posture of resting in truth to a posture of interrogating it.
It's exactly how a toxic corporate raider might orchestrate a hostile takeover or, how a master gaslighter operates in a relationship.
The tactics are identical.
They don't walk up and say, I'm going to destroy you. They say, are you sure your partner really meant it when they said they'd support you? Are you sure your boss actually values your work?
Yeah, it's the creation of an alternative narrative.
The serpent uses a question to dismantle trust. And once you doubt the foundation of your reality, you are completely unmoored.
And once that seed of doubt takes root, he immediately escalates the tactic. He moves from destabilizing the word to distorting the character behind the word.
What's the second step?
The serpent asks, did God actually say, you shall not eat of any tree in the garden? Now we know from the architectural blueprint in chapter 2 that they were explicitly told they could eat from every tree in the garden except one.
Right. It was an environment of massive abundance.
But the serpent reframes the single boundary as if it's a universal restriction. He introduces the mechanism of resentment.
Precisely. He paints the creator not as a generous giver of life, but as a cosmic killjoy who is holding out on them.
The psychological shift here is profound.
It really is. By phrasing it that way, the serpent forces the woman's focus away from the staggering abundance of the entire garden and hyperfixates her attention on the one single thing she cannot have.
It's the scarcity mindset weaponized.
Like having a multi-million-dollar salary, a corner office, and a beautiful home, but someone whispers, can you believe the CEO won't let you use his private parking spot? He must really disrespect you.
That's a great analogy. Suddenly the millions don't matter.
No. You are consumed by the one restriction. You start viewing the boundary not as a mechanism for your safety, but as an act of oppression.
Which perfectly primes the target for the third stage.
Right, because now they're resentful.
Exactly. Once trust is destabilized and the character of the authority figure is successfully smeared in their minds, the serpent moves in with a direct contradiction. Step 3 is the denial of consequence. You will not surely die.
He just flat out calls God a liar.
He does. He removes the danger from the equation. He fundamentally alters their risk assessment.
So he's basically saying it's safe to jump.
He is saying the boundary isn't a law of gravity, it's just a fence, and there's no cliff on the other side. You won't break yourself, you'll just break a silly rule.
Wow.
And then he delivers the final, fatal blow of the campaign, the promise of exaltation. For God knows that when you eat of it, your eyes will be opened, and you will be like God, knowing good and evil.
The mechanism of narcissism, and what Villasis points out here is so critical. The serpent isn't just offering a tasty piece of fruit.
No, the fruit is just the vehicle.
He is offering a counterfeit path to wisdom. He is offering exaltation detached from submission.
The promise is absolute autonomy. The serpent is proposing a worldview where humanity can define reality for themselves without relying on the creator.
You can be the source of your own truth.
Exactly. You don't have to receive it, you can seize it.
I really want you listening to this right now to pause and consider how this mechanism operates in your own daily life.
It's disturbingly relevant.
It is. Think about the anatomy of a terrible decision you've made. When you are tempted to cut a massive corner at work, or betray a trust, or hold on to a vicious grudge, it almost never announces itself in your brain as a terrible, destructive idea.
No, it rarely does.
It sounds like liberation. It sounds like I deserve this, or I need to do this to protect my own interests because no one else is looking out for me. The serpent's promise is effective because it repackages rebellion as enlightenment.
It taps into the deepest vulnerability of the human psyche, the desire for control. The strategy was laid out flawlessly by the serpent, but as the essay notes, the fracture still required human consent.
The trap was set, but humanity had to choose to step into it.
Right. Which brings us to the actual anatomy of the mistake. How does a healthy, uncorrected human mind actually cross that line?
Yeah, how does it physically happen?
The infographics map this out as a triple allure. It wasn't just a sudden blind leap. There were 3 distinct vectors through which this temptation bypassed their defenses.
Let's look at the breakdown of Genesis 3.6.
The text describes the woman's thought process right before the act. It says she saw that the tree was good for food, that it was a delight to the eyes, and that it was to be desired to make one wise.
Okay.
Villasis maps these out categorically as appetite, beauty, and ambition. These are the 3 distinct doors through which the rebellion enters the human experience.
Okay, let's explore the mechanism of each of these, because at first glance, none of those things sound inherently evil.
Right, they sound perfectly normal.
Having an appetite is biological. Appreciating beauty is a core part of what makes us human. Wanting to be wise is literally what the rest of the wisdom literature in the Bible tells you to strive for.
Exactly.
So how do these healthy traits become the vectors for destruction?
The key is in how the desire is oriented.
Mm.
Let's take appetite, the tree being good for food. The desire for sustenance is God-given. But here the appetite becomes untethered from the divine provision.
Becomes twisted.
Right. It becomes a craving to consume something specifically designated as off-limits.
Mm.
It is the mechanism of grasping. Instead of receiving what is freely given, the appetite demands the one thing withheld.
It's the seed of consumerism, really, the belief that consuming this specific forbidden thing will finally satisfy the internal hunger.
Yeah, the lie that this one product will fix you.
And what about beauty? The text says it was a delight to the eyes.
Aesthetics hold incredible power over the human heart. We are drawn to beauty. But in this moment, the beauty of the fruit is weaponized against the beauty of the Creator's design.
The visual overrides the logical.
Exactly. The aesthetic draw bypasses the rational command. It's the mechanism we see constantly in modern life, where we justify destructive relationships, unethical purchases, or harmful habits simply because they are visually or emotionally intoxicating in the moment.
The beauty blinds the judgment. We confuse what is beautiful with what is inherently good.
We do, all the time.
We assume that if it looks that appealing, it couldn't possibly be a mechanism for death. And then the third vector, which Velazquez seems to indicate, is the deepest one: ambition. Desire to make one wise.
This is the intellectual pride vector.
Yeah.
Again, wisdom is good. But the essay argues that it's the method of acquiring it that corrupts it here.
They want a shortcut.
They are trying to steal the answers to the test, rather than learning them through a relationship with the teacher. It's an ambition to elevate the self at the expense of the divine order. It is the ego deciding it no longer needs instruction.
So the temptation completely blankets the human experience. It hits the physical body through appetite, the emotional heart through beauty, and the intellectual mind through ambition.
A total system breach.
But there is a glaring detail in this scene that I think we need to talk about, because popular culture almost always gets it wrong.
Yes, the presence of Adam.
Right. In all the classic paintings, it's just Eve and the snake having this conversation while Adam is presumably off naming a platypus somewhere else. But that's not what the text says, is it?
No, it is not. And Velazquez places significant emphasis on this detail. The text explicitly states that Adam was with her. He wasn't absent.
He was standing right there for the entire epistemological attack.
He is present, and he's entirely passive. It is a profound failure of the priestly kingly vocation we discussed earlier.
He was supposed to be guarding the garden.
Exactly. He was commissioned to guard and keep it. The serpent enters, launches a psychological assault on his wife in the character of God, and Adam does absolutely nothing. He abdicates his responsibility.
The sociology of passivity, it reminds me of the bystander effect. Or when a corporate board watches a CEO drive a company into the ground with unethical practices, and everyone just sits quietly in the room because it's easier than initiating conflict.
Right, avoiding the hard conversation.
Adam's silence is just as damning as the action of taking the fruit.
Velazquez defines this first sin not merely as a technical rule-breaking, but as unbelief expressed in act. And Adam's passivity is a crucial part of that unbelief.
They stop trusting.
They both stopped believing that God was good, they stopped believing that his word was true, and they acted or failed to act based on that new, corrupted worldview. They cross the boundary, they eat.
And the immediate fallout is instantaneous.
It happens the second they eat.
The text says their eyes were opened, which, ironically, is exactly what the serpent promised. But it wasn't the glorious enlightenment they were sold. Velazquez writes that innocence collapses into self-protection.
The shift is so tragic.
For the very first time in human history, they realize they are naked, and they experience shame.
The phenomenology of shame here is striking. Think about what shame actually is on a psychological level.
How would you define it?
It is the sudden, horrifying awareness of your own vulnerability and inadequacy in the eyes of another. Before the breach, their nakedness was a symbol of total trust and transparency.
Right, there was nothing to hide.
Exactly. They had nothing to hide because they were completely secure in their identity. But the moment they seized autonomy, they severed the tether to their creator.
They realize they are entirely on their own. The safety net is gone.
And so the immediate biological and psychological response is to cover up, to hide, to shrink. They sew fig leaves together. The creature now views its own existence as something to be concealed.
That is heartbreaking.
And when God enters the garden, when the presence of absolute truth and goodness draws near, that shame metastasizes into terror. They hide among the trees.
It's such a tragic image. They use the very garden they were supposed to cultivate as a fortress to hide from the one who gave it to them.
The irony is profound.
And this leads to what is arguably the most recognizable human behavior in the entire text. God initiates contact. He asks Adam, "Where are you? And have you eaten from the tree?" And we get the original courtroom of evasion.
The invention of the psychological defense mechanism.
The rapid descent is breathtaking. Fear drives the flight, but blame drives the relational breakdown. When confronted, Adam does not confess.
No, not at all.
He employs projection and rationalization. He points to Eve and says, "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit of the tree, and I ate."
It's a closed-loop psychological defense system.
Yeah.
The moment his ego detects the massive threat of absolute guilt, it immediately reroutes the power to external defense mechanisms.
Adam essentially uses Eve as a human shield against divine justice.
He throws her right under the bus.
But it's even worse than that because of how he phrases it.
Yeah.
The woman whom you gave to be with me, he isn't just blaming Eve, he is directly indicting the creator.
He is saying, if you hadn't put her here, I wouldn't have failed. Therefore, the structural flaw is your fault, not mine.
Unbelievable.
It is the ultimate refusal of accountability. And then God turns to Eve, and she employs the exact same mechanism. She blames the serpent. The serpent deceived me, and I ate.
No one owns the choice.
Nobody.
And again, for you listening, think about how painfully relevant this architecture is today. When you make a massive error that hurts someone you love, or you drop the ball critically at work, what is your brain's first instinctual reflex?
It's never, I messed up.
No. Do you immediately own the failure with total transparency, or do you externalize the responsibility? Well, I wouldn't have yelled if you hadn't provoked me. Or, I only missed the deadline because the client didn't provide the right files.
We instantly hide behind our excuses.
We project our guilt onto our environment, and we justify our actions. The text is arguing that we aren't just imitating this behavior, we're living out the inherited architecture of Genesis 3 every single day.
It is a profound, tragic cycle. Imagination, disobedience, shame, hiding, blame.
A complete systemic breakdown.
The fall, fundamentally disordered human moral perception. We can no longer see ourselves, our actions, or our environment clearly. But Velasquez's essay pushes further. It argues that this immediate psychological fracturing, as devastating as it is only the surface-level symptom.
Right.
The rupture goes much deeper into the theological core of reality.
Right, the root cause. This wasn't just a bad afternoon where two people made a mistake. This was a cosmic shift that brought an entirely new power dynamic into the world.
It altered reality.
So let's transition into section 3 of our sources and look at the theological core principles that undergird this whole event, starting with this concept of idolatry. Velasquez defines sin here not just as doing bad things, but as an act of disordered worship.
This is a vital conceptual shift for modern readers.
How so?
When we hear the word sin, we usually think of a list of moral infractions: lying, stealing, cheating. But drawing heavily on the theology of the Apostle Paul in Romans 1, Velasquez explains that sin is fundamentally theological rebellion. It is an issue of worship. Yes, humans are inherently worshiping creatures. We are built to revere, to serve, and to find our ultimate meaning in something outside of ourselves.
I think of the writer David Foster Wallace, who famously said in a commencement speech that everybody worships. The only choice we get is what to worship.
That's a perfect parallel.
If you don't worship a spiritual reality, you'll worship money or intellect or beauty or power, and it will eventually eat you alive.
That is the exact mechanism Velasquez is describing. Disordered worship means the human heart turned away from receiving its identity from the Creator and instead began grasping at finite things to provide infinite meaning.
We point our worship at things we think we can control.
Or consume or manage.
We worship our careers, assuming they will give us absolute security. We worship our romantic partners, demanding that they provide us with perfect, unconditional love that they are completely incapable of sustaining.
They just can't bear that weight.
And when those finite things eventually collapse under the crushing weight of our infinite expectations, we are destroyed.
Precisely. And because humanity disconnected itself from the eternal source of life to worship these finite things, a new structural reality enters the human condition: death.
But the essay differentiates the types of death here, right?
Yes, Velasquez is very careful to define the mechanism of death here. The original warning, "You shall surely die," was not merely a biological expiration date. It was both a judicial sentence and an existential reality.
Existential death. The essay references Ephesians 2.1, describing humanity as being dead in trespasses and sins. It means a fundamental alienation from the source of life.
And that spiritual alienation brings immense psychological bondage. Velasquez points to Hebrews 2.14-15 to show that humanity became enslaved by a lifelong fear of death.
Enslaved by the fear of death.
This is where the theology maps perfectly onto modern psychology, specifically terror management theory. The underlying, often subconscious terror of our own mortality and our alienation from the divine now governs our behavior.
How does that terror manifest practically, like in our day-to-day?
It drives our endless greed. We hoard wealth and resources far beyond what we could ever need because we are terrified of lacking, terrified of being vulnerable to the elements.
Wow, yeah.
It drives our obsession with control and power. We try to micromanage our lives, our organizations, and other people because we are desperately trying to build a fortress against our own mortality.
We want to feel untouchable.
We seek legacy through conquest or extreme ambition because we want to leave a mark that death can't erase. The fall created not just a mortality rate, but a state of pervasive existential bondage.
Okay, this is the point where I have to pause and wrestle with this logic. Because if we follow this premise to its absolute end, we hit a wall.
What's the wall?
Well, if human nature is so deeply corrupted by disordered worship, and if we are operating under this pervasive spiritual death and bondage, how do you explain all the good in the world? Because I look around, and yes, I see the greed, the hoarding, and the toxic control. But I also see a firefighter running into a burning building to save a stranger's child. I see breathtaking symphonies being composed. I see profound, selfless empathy.
You see beauty.
If the blueprint is ruined, why isn't human history just a non-stop, 100% evil horror show?
That is the exact tension you introduced in the first 5 minutes of our discussion, and it's the most important nuance in this entire framework.
How does the author explain it?
Velasquez addresses this under the principle of human dignity and human ruin. The mechanism that explains this is that we are fallen image bearers. The image of God, that priestly, kingly blueprint we talked about, was not erased by the rebellion. It was deformed.
Deformed, but not destroyed. The architecture is severely damaged, but the foundation is still there.
Exactly. The author argues that this is the only worldview that accurately accounts for why the world is simultaneously glorious and utterly broken.
Because other worldviews fall short.
Right. Optimistic humanism says humans are basically good, but then it has no coherent explanation for the unending atrocities of human history.
Yeah.
Cynical nihilism says humans are basically evil animals, but then it can't explain our transcendent capacity for beauty, altruism, and universal concepts of justice.
We don't fit into either of those neat little boxes.
We don't. The biblical doctrine of the fall holds both realities together in a profound paradox. Velasquez uses a striking contrast here that perfectly captures it. This duality of a deformed blueprint is why human beings build cathedrals in concentration camps.
Man, cathedrals and concentration camps.
It is why we write symphonies and design sophisticated financial scams. It is why we build hospitals to heal the sick and then launch wars that fill those hospitals.
It's the ultimate whiplash.
We still have the original design written into our very nature. We long for justice. We desire to create beauty. We instinctively know we are meant for something transcendent. But because that blueprint is damaged by disordered worship and the fear of death, we constantly practice injustice. We corrupt the beauty we create, and our ambitions often lead to destruction.
Cathedrals and concentration camps. That encapsulates the paradox perfectly. We are carrying around this incredibly beautiful, heavily damaged source code.
Yeah.
But the pivot point of this entire deep dive and the core of Voss's essay is that the narrative doesn't end with the ruin. The text asserts that the creator didn't look at the damaged blueprint, throw his hands up in frustration, and scrap the project.
No, he didn't abandon it.
The tragedy of Genesis 3 immediately triggers a massive systemic rescue mission.
It does. And this moves us into section 4 of our sources, the grand narrative of fire. If you look at the sequence of events right after the blame game in the garden, God hands down the consequences, the curses on the serpent, the pain in childbirth, the cursed ground, the toil of human labor.
The fallout.
But right in the middle of that devastating judgment, God establishes a mechanism for redemption. It is found in Genesis 3.15, and in theological terms, it is called the proto-evangelium.
The proto-evangelium, literally translating to the first gospel or the prototype of the good news.
Exactly. It is the first glimmer of hope. God says to the serpent that he will put enmity between the serpent and the woman and between their offspring. And then comes the specific promise The seed of the woman will crush the serpent's head, even though the serpent will strike his heel.
So even amidst the ruin, there is a promise that the source of the deception will ultimately be destroyed, though at great cost to the deliverer. The heel is struck, but the head is crushed.
Right.
The essay notes that this isn't just a throwaway line of poetry. It is the seed from which the rest of redemptive history grows.
Velasquez points out that this is the moment the creator binds himself to ruined history. The infographics map this trajectory beautifully. From that single verse, a timeline of grace begins to unfold over thousands of years. It operates through covenant.
Let's define how covenant works in this context, because it's not just a contract, right?
No, a contract is an exchange of goods or services based on mutual performance. If you break a contract, it's void.
You just walk away.
But a covenant in this biblical framework is a binding of persons. It is grace entering ruined history. God makes unilateral promises to preserve humanity through Noah, to build a redemptive nation through Abraham, to provide a moral law through Israel.
He keeps initiating.
God works through the broken human material, despite their constant failures, to keep that promise of the seed alive.
And according to the essay, that trajectory of the seed slowly unfolds across centuries, surviving exile, war, and corruption until it reaches its structural fulfillment in the person of Christ.
Yes, the culmination of the covenant.
Velasquez references Galatians 4 and Romans 5 here, drawing a profound parallel by describing Jesus as the last Adam.
This is one of the most vital architectural connections in the entire text. To understand the rescue, you have to understand the symmetry of the two Adams.
Walk us through that symmetry.
The first Adam failed in a perfect, lush garden environment where every single need was met. The last Adam, Jesus, is depicted in the New Testament as facing the ultimate test, not in a garden, but in a barren, hostile wilderness after fasting for 40 days.
The contrast of environments is staggering.
Yeah.
And the Gospel of Matthew chapter 4 details this wilderness temptation. The expert text points out that the exact same three vectors of the triple allure were deployed against the last Adam.
It is the exact same mechanism of attack. The serpent, the devil, attacks through appetite. Command these stones to become bread.
Because he was literally starving.
Right. He attacks through beauty and ambition, showing him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory, offering immediate power and exaltation without the pain of the cross.
But the mechanism of defense is entirely different this time. How does Jesus respond? He doesn't engage in interpretive suspicion.
No, he doesn't entertain the doubt for a second.
He answers every single vector of attack by grounding himself in the original reality. He says, "It is written."
He defends with revelation. The battle was, and always is, over trust in the Word of God. The first Adam's passive unbelief and disobedience brought the architecture of death into the human experience.
And the last Adam?
Last Adam's active belief and total obedience dismantled that architecture and initiated redemption.
It's as if in chapter 1 of a massive, sweeping novel, the protagonist triggers a bomb that fractures the entire world. But the author immediately, quietly writes the exact code to defuse that bomb in the margins of that very same page.
I love that.
And then they spend the rest of the book moving the characters toward the defusal. The rescue was initiated the absolute second the ruin occurred.
That is an excellent way to visualize the narrative structure. And the timeline doesn't stop at the cross. The infographics trace this all the way to our present moment and beyond.
Where are we on the timeline now?
Eden's expulsion prefigures Israel's later exile from their promised land, and it sets the sociological stage for how the church is meant to exist today. According to Velasquez, the church now lives as a new humanity in a state of tension between Christ's definitive victory and the final consummation of all things.
The already but not yet.
Exactly.
The bomb has been diffused, the victory is secured, but the fallout is still clearing from the atmosphere. We still experience pain, we still fight the mechanisms of the fall, but the ultimate outcome is guaranteed.
Yes.
And I love where this trajectory ends. The essay emphasizes that the grand narrative of the Bible does not end with a return to the Garden of Eden.
That is a very common misconception. The biblical eschatology, the study of the end of things, is not a giant rewind button.
We aren't just going backwards.
It is not about abandoning human history to go back to being naked in a primitive garden.
Right. It ends with a greater, far more complex reality. The final chapters of Revelation describe the New Jerusalem. It is a city garden.
A completely new reality.
God dwells intimately with humanity again. The curse is completely removed, and death is eradicated. But the concept of a city implies that the best parts of human culture, creativity, and technology, the cathedrals, the symphonies, the discoveries, are redeemed and integrated into this new creation.
That's the beauty of it.
We don't just get back what we lost, we gain something exponentially more glorious and eternally secure.
The trajectory is incredibly hopeful. The serpent's psychological victory in the garden was temporary, but the Creator's restorative kingdom is everlasting.
But as beautiful and sweeping as this grand arc is, Velazquez explicitly warns that if we leave this as just high-level theology, we miss the point entirely.
Oh, absolutely.
If we misunderstand the mechanics of the fall, we completely lose the power of this redemption in our actual, practical, daily lives.
Yes, which brings us to section 5 of our source material. Velazquez lays out 5 specific traps, and these very common modern misunderstandings that people fall into when they read the Genesis account.
I want to spend some real time exploring these because they dictate how we actually live and operate today.
Let's do it. The first trap Velazquez identifies is reducing the fall to a mere symbol or a mythic description of human evolutionary immaturity.
This is huge in modern academic circles. The idea that Adam and Eve are just archetypes of human consciousness waking up, and the story is just a moral fable about the pain of growing up. Why does the essay argue that this is a dangerous trap?
Because if you view the story merely as a psychological fable, it collapses the historical architecture required for salvation.
How does it break the architecture?
Velazquez notes that the profound theological arguments made in Romans 5 and 1 Corinthians 15 depend entirely on the historical reality of Adam and Christ. If the first Adam is only a symbol, then the last Adam's physical death and resurrection lose their structural mechanism for saving humanity.
Oh, I see.
The biblical argument requires a real rupture in history to necessitate a real historical rescue. If you erase the historicity of the ruin, you undermine the foundation of the redemption.
You can't fix a structural problem with a metaphorical solution. Okay, misunderstanding number 2, treating sin as only external behavior.
This trap is the breeding ground for legalism. If we believe the fall was simply about Adam and Eve breaking an arbitrary rule, then our solution to fixing the human condition is just to follow rules better.
We create massive checklists of external behaviors to monitor.
Exactly.
And we completely ignore the mechanism of the heart. We ignore the disordered desire, the misdirected worship, the internal grasping that actually causes the behavior.
It's all superficial.
It's like trying to cure a systemic infection by just putting makeup over the physical symptoms. It leads to incredibly shallow ethics, and ultimately it creates hypocrites who look clean on the outside but are still spiritually dead on the inside.
Exactly. The third trap is making the serpent too small. In our modern, hyper-rationalistic age, we tend to view the serpent either as just a metaphor for our own internal bad thoughts or as a quaint, primitive superstition.
Right, like a cartoon villain.
But Velazquez points to Revelation 12, which identifies the ancient serpent explicitly as the devil and Satan.
So the text requires an acknowledgement of a personal, intelligent evil.
It does. The essay cautions that while we shouldn't sensationalize demonic reality or look for a demon behind every flat tire, we cannot dismiss the systemic, intelligent nature of evil in the world.
There's an active adversary.
There's an active adversary working to destabilize truth and destroy human flourishing. Recognizing that changes how you engage in spiritual and moral conflicts, You realize the battle is far more complex than just human willpower.
That makes total sense. Now, misunderstanding number 4 is where I really had to stop and reread the text because it challenged a fundamental assumption I had.
The concept of judgment.
Yeah. The trap is losing hope inside judgment. Velazquez writes that even the curse in Genesis 3 contains profound mercy and that the exile from Eden was actually a protective act.
This is a brilliant insight into the mechanics of the narrative.
But on the surface, getting kicked out of a literal paradise sounds like the ultimate penalty. It sounds like pure punitive judgment. How can exile be construed as protective?
To understand this, you have to look at what else was in the center of the garden. Alongside the tree of the knowledge of good and evil was the tree of life.
Okay, I'm tracking.
If humanity had been allowed to stay in the garden after the rebellion, in their newly fallen, corrupted, ashamed, and spiritually dead state, and they ate from the tree of life, what would have happened?
Oh, man. They would have lived forever in that ruined condition.
Exactly. They would have achieved physical immortality while remaining in a state of absolute spiritual bondage.
It would be an eternal zombie state. To live forever, but forever alienated from God, forever hiding in shame, forever blaming each other, forever grasping for power, and never being satisfied.
A true nightmare.
It's like the Greek myth of Tithonus, who asked the gods for eternal life, but forgot to ask for eternal youth, so he just aged and suffered forever without being able to die.
It would be hell on earth, permanently locked in. So the text reveals that God exiled them and placed cherubim with a flaming sword to block access to the tree of life, specifically to prevent humanity from permanently immortalizing their brokenness.
That is wild.
He removed their access to eternal life then, so that through the long, painful process of redemptive history, they could be transformed and inherit a glorified, true, eternal life later.
That reframes the entire concept of divine judgment in this text. The boundary of the flaming sword was an act of profound love.
It was mercy.
The expulsion was an act of preservation, which naturally leads into the fifth and final misunderstanding, neglecting the new Adam. Velazquez states that the point of studying Genesis 3 isn't just to make us sit around feeling miserable about how deeply flawed we are.
No, the entire purpose of diagnosing the disease so thoroughly is to make us desperate for the cure. Any theology of the fall that doesn't immediately drive you toward the rescue mission of Christ hasn't gone far enough.
The ruin is meant to highlight the absolute necessity of the Redeemer.
Precisely.
And this brings us to the ultimate bottom line for the listener. How does all of this heavy theology actually map onto our Tuesday mornings? How does this ancient architecture affect how we live, work, and relate to each other today?
Right, the practical application.
Velazquez breaks this down into practical applications for discipleship, leadership, and daily living.
Let's start with discipleship. Given everything we've discussed about the serpent's epistemological attack, the essay describes the life of a believer as a long war against false narratives.
Because the serpent's question, did God actually say, hasn't gone away. It just changed form.
It's still the exact same tactic.
The culture is constantly whispering that God is withholding from you, that his design for human flourishing is actually oppressive, that his commands are too costly to your personal autonomy.
True discipleship, therefore, requires intense discernment. Velazquez suggests that whenever you are faced with a significant choice, you have to analyze the mechanism of your own desire.
Like taking a step back and observing yourself.
Yes. You must ask yourself, does this choice lead me to trust the Creator more deeply? Or is this an attempt to become my own God? Am I receiving my identity or am I grasping for it? It's about constantly reorienting the heart's loves, not just managing your external behavior.
The section on leadership in this essay is equally convicting. Velazquez argues that leaders, whether in a church, a corporation, or a family, fall when they trust charisma more than character.
That is a massive point.
Adam's failure in the garden was fundamentally a failure of spiritual leadership and responsibility. He desired to be uncontested, to avoid conflict, and to passively let the false narrative take over.
For anyone listening who holds influence over others, the lesson is stark. The greatest protection against the serpent's methodology isn't necessarily higher intelligence or better strategy. It is humility and a ruthless submission to truth.
Knowing you aren't the ultimate authority.
Right. The moment a leader begins to believe they are the source of their own authority, rather than a steward of derived authority, they are replicating the exact architecture of the fall.
And finally, there is the application for daily living. If we connect this all back to the bigger picture, the reality of the fall explains the friction in your everyday life.
It explains all of it.
It explains why your work is often deeply frustrating, why there are metaphorical thorns and thistles in your career path. It explains why your most intimate relationships strain under the weight of miscommunication, defensiveness, and the constant urge to blame.
It's the original blueprint playing out.
It explains why your own self-deception is so incredibly persistent.
But according to the framework we're exploring, the response to this friction isn't cynical despair. It is living in active hope. Velazquez writes a line that I find deeply compelling. Everyday faithfulness, therefore, becomes an act of resistance.
I want to list out the specific acts of resistance Velazquez identifies because they serve as a practical counter-liturgy to the fall. The author writes,
But this list is so good.
Honesty resists the serpent's deception.
Yeah.
Confession resists the instinct to hide in shame.
So powerful.
Observing the Sabbath resists the endless grasping of self-salvation. Chastity resists the mechanism of disordered desire. Generosity resists the fear-driven hoarding of greed. And forgiveness resists the endless destructive cycle of blame.
That list is nothing less than a practical roadmap for dismantling the mechanics of Genesis 3 in your daily life.
It really is.
Every single time You choose to openly confess a failure instead of hiding it and blaming your colleague. You are actively resisting the ancient architecture of the fall. You are pushing back the darkness and aligning yourself with the new creation.
So what does this all mean as we synthesize this massive journey today? The core thesis of our deep dive, drawn from Chris Velazquez's profound analysis, is that the Genesis account of the fall isn't just a depressing story about where humanity went wrong.
No, it's not just a tragedy.
It is the foundational diagnosis that reveals exactly where God met us in our absolute ruin. The catastrophic tragedy of our rebellion was met instantaneously by the relentless promise of a Redeemer.
And how we respond to that reality is the most vital question of our lives. Velazquez argues that the serpent's underlying logic has not expired.
It's still whispering.
The temptation to believe that absolute autonomy is true freedom, that the Creator's design is restrictive, and that we can successfully manufacture meaning apart from the source of life, that whisper is the dominant frequency of our modern culture.
It is everywhere. And Velazquez makes the argument that for the modern reader, the response to this ancient, destabilizing doubt has to be an intentional reaffirmation of reality.
We have to choose to believe the word.
When the culture asks, did God actually say? The response must be a clear, steady, and grounded, yes, he did, and his word remains true.
Exactly.
Understanding this psychological and theological framework gives you the tools to spot the lie. It helps you recognize that throwing off the structural boundaries of reality doesn't lead to glorious enlightenment. It inevitably leads to you hiding behind a tree, terrified, ashamed, and entirely alone.
The profound hope of this narrative is that the end of the human story is not the permanent loss of the garden. It is the guaranteed arrival of the city garden, where the curse is eradicated and the deformed blueprint is finally made perfect.
Velazquez's essay leaves us with a paradox that I want to offer to you as a final thought to mull over. Whether you view this text as divine revelation or simply foundational human literature.
That's a great thought.
We spend so much of our modern lives fighting to tear down boundaries, convinced that true freedom is found in total, unrestrained autonomy. But what if the source code of human psychology requires boundaries to keep us from destroying ourselves?
It completely flips the script.
What if true freedom isn't the absence of boundaries, but rather finding the exact specific boundary you were designed by your creator to flourish within?
That changes the entire definition of freedom.
So I leave you with this question. What boundary in your life are you currently fighting against, calling it restrictive or unfair, that might actually be a load-bearing pillar designed to keep you alive? Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.